When you look across the landscape of the modern-day United States of America, the actual footprints of the Wild West are few and far between. The Industrial Revolution truly changed the iconography and images of American frontiers, infrastructures, and communities at large. That being said, not all that existed during the earliest eras in United States history are merely left in the dust of a more modern age. Ghost towns, especially those of long-forgotten Western settlements, are perfectly picturesque replicas of the spaces we once occupied all across the Great Plains and beyond. In a way, ghost towns from the Wild West are the best preserved footprints of the frontier we now only experience through textbooks and encyclopedias, their crumbling architecture and wayward atmospheres now the symbol of the period's makeshift attitudes. If one thing is for certain, it's that with every ghost town comes an incredibly rich story full of both optimistic beginnings and haunted endings, much like the general history of the Wild West itself. To gain a better picture of the types of ghost towns still left unpopulated across the barren, dusty plains born of the American frontiers yesteryear, here is another fascinating ghost town with a deep yet haunted connection to the Wild West. The earliest rendition of St. Elmo, Colorado came together in 1875, when a few gold prospectors were trekking through the region in search of potential claims. Over the next couple of years, both gold and silver were found throughout the Sawatch Mountain Range, 10,000 feet above sea level and just 1,000 feet below the timberline. Hungry miners and hopeful prospectors then poured into the region tenfold, with claims being made left and right. The top-of-the-line mines were called Mary Murphy, the Molly, the Pioneer, and Therese C. At first, the ensuing mining camp that cropped up in present-day Chaffee County was called Forest City. However, soon after the moniker came to be, folk inhabiting the camp decided the name was unfit due to the growing number of forest cities on maps drawn up of the surrounding territories. One of the town's founding figures, Griffith Evans, had a remedy to the naming issue. At the time, he was in the middle of reading a 19th century romance novel titled St. Elmo and realized it would make quite the moniker for his new settlement. The name stuck, and St. Elmo, Colorado never looked back. When the town was first under construction, a winter season's worth of snowfall had already cascaded the Sawatch Mountains. Thus, the fringes of St. Elmo were laid down with heaps of snow surrounding the settlement, estimated to reach heights of 6 feet. Once the bare bones of the town were sturdy and upright, the miners flooded its streets and shops by the hundreds. These weren't mining families or groups of diverse migrating parties, however. Especially in the early days, St. Elmo was populated by single men looking for nothing more than honest work by day and a hell of a good time by night. It's said that early on in St. Elmo, the town's vices flourished. Lonely miners packed the saloons, brothels, and dance houses. In 1880, construction on the Alpine Tunnel brought in a second wave of laborers, both in the long and short term. The Alpine was built for a narrow-gauge railway from Denver to Gunnison, Colorado, and played a vital role in the early development of mining camps and forest towns such as St. Elmo. By 1881, the Alpine Tunnel was reaching its completion, and the railway itself laid down tracks in to and throughout the region. The Denver, South Park, and Pacific Railroad took hold of St. Elmo and built a station at the heart of the mining town. From the station in St. Elmo, direct service led to Romley and Hancock, Colorado. These were two small, now defunct settlements that only survived due to the resource output put on by St. Elmo. Area homesteaders saw St. Elmo as the perfect destination to work in and around the Sawatch region, now with the train on schedule. Eventually, 2,000 folks flocked to the once dwindling mining encampment, and along with them, the infrastructure of St. Elmo ballooned. With the official 1882 opening of the Alpine Tunnel, St. Elmo soon featured not only its brothels and bars, but also 5 hotels and restaurants, a working telegraph station, a schoolhouse, merchandise shops, smelting and blacksmith outfits, as well as a notable newspaper called the St. Elmo Mountaineer. Another harbinger of St. Elmo's early success was the output of the aforementioned Mary Murphy Mine. The Murphy Mine was found nearly 2,000 feet above the recently laid railway tracks. It could transfer upwards of 75 tons of gold, silver, copper, and iron ore per day. In fact, by the time the operation closed, later into the 20th century, the Mary Murphy would account for an estimated $60 million in total gold sales during its years as an active mine. A year prior to the Alpine Tunnel bringing forth gold and grandeur to the miners of the Swatch Range, St. Elmo would see some of its most prosperous and important citizens move into the former forest city. In 1881, a cattleman by the name of Anton Stark was driving a moderate herd to the railroad station construction site in the heart of St. Elmo. In a matter of days, Stark felt enamored by the charm of the quaint mining town and convinced the rest of his family to move alongside him. Switching from a livestock career to one focused on the region's spoils, Stark became a section boss for one of the nearby mines. Anna Stark, Anton's wife, found her calling at a local general store, where she managed a selective inventory. She was also the operator of the local Home Comfort Hotel, the predecessor to St. Elmo's Telegraph and Post Office. When they weren't on the job sites, Anton and Anna were busy raising 3 children, named Tony, Roy, and Annabelle. All 3 kids were vital in maintaining the family's legacy, known for their wide variety of goods for sale, pristine lodging, and some of the best home-cooked meals money could buy on the south side of the Colorado River. However, with the top-notch offerings in St. Elmo came with a host of other curious stories about the Stark family. Legend has it that the 3 children were under a strict regimen controlled by their mother Anna. It's said that none of the kids were allowed to go outside of the family home, except for church, because their mother felt the family was better than the bulk of St. Elmo citizenry. On one hand, caution in the mining camp was warranted, and considering most of the population consisted of railroad men, rugged miners, and sex workers filling the brothels and dance halls. On the other hand, the children were suffocated in a settlement bursting with the opportunity of exploration and adventure. It's not as if they were the only children around to call St. Elmo their home. Ultimately, the haughty attitude of the Stark matriarch contributed to a growing sense of angst between not only the family itself, but between the Stark clan and St. Elmo visitors and residents alike. Nevertheless, the rest of St. Elmo ignored the enigmatic Starks and saw the town flourish through the rest of the decade. The 1880s saw tremendous growth, and 1890 was considered the peak of St. Elmo's tenure as a frontier success story. That is, until it wasn't. Later in 1890, a small fire in the business sector of St. Elmo grew until it engulfed the entire district. A population well over 2,000 quickly dwindled to nothing, as the buildings were never reconstructed. Not only that, but with a lack of revival following the fire of 1890, miners started looking for work elsewhere, leaving in droves as the 1890s progressed. In 1895, the last print of the St. Elmo Mountaineer left the press, and the newspaper fell out of circulation. Eventually, enough miners departed from the town, and the once iconic Alpine Tunnel that gave birth to St. Elmo's heyday was closed in 1910. Only the Mary Murphy Mine was the only one to remain open, but seldom miners made the move to the Swatch Range at that point in time. For the next 12 years, enough stragglers stuck around at the town for the hotel to remain open and the train station to continue service. It wasn't until 1922 the railroad closed down for good, and on the last passenger rail car out of town, every single remaining resident possessed a ticket, watching their little Colorado paradise shrink from the window. The St. Elmo exodus was complete. Almost. 5 notable folks stuck around the mining camp turned destination after everyone else decided against it. The Stark family remained loyal to Anton's hometown discovery and wouldn't give up on St. Elmo as easily as everyone else. The tragedy of the Stark family was only just beginning, however, as their aforementioned leader, Anton, passed away. Around the same time, his 2 sons, Roy and Tony Stark, were attempting to salvage the mines that remained ripe with potential. They hoped that developers would flood the region once more at the news of rejuvenated mining efforts. However, these petitions proved fruitless. Rather, the treasured Mary Murphy mine finally ceased operations in 1925, and the Starks were forced to tourism. It remained their only tenable option to keep their family afloat, let alone all the remaining St. Elmo ventures that they managed. The few cabins that they renovated were turned into vacation rentals, attractive digs for recreational travelers. Again though, the scheme ultimately wasn't enough for the newly widowed Anna Stark to feed her family. Thus, she dispatched Annabelle to Salida, Colorado, a small locale 20 miles south of St. Elmo, where she was hired to work in the telegraph office. Annabelle was thrilled, finally freed of the constraints her mother had forced upon her for years. It had cost the girl any notion of social skills, and these shortcomings showed as she attempted and failed to make a life for herself in Salida. The story goes that Annabelle didn't adjust well to an independent lifestyle away from what was essentially house arrest. She met a young man known only by the name of Ward, and thought it was true love at first sight. The romance didn't last for long though. After the remaining Stark family received a telegram from Annabelle and Ward alerting them of the couple's marriage and move to Trinidad, Annabelle inexplicably returned to St. Elmo. For whatever reason, the marriage ended in divorce as swiftly as it started. The reason wasn't ever recorded. However, it's been rumored to have crumbled as a result of Annabelle's deteriorating mental health and emotional state. Regardless of soured love, St. Elmo continued into a state of disrepair. In 1926, the abandoned railway tracks were destroyed and removed to open up a road into St. Elmo from the locale of Nathrop, Colorado. The Stark family simply couldn't let go of their estate, and bought the surrounding plots of land whenever offered at county tax sales. They were dead set on continuing the failed tourism industry that they attempted to establish years prior. According to locals, the three children had grown into eccentric adults, all unsocialized with quirks and bizarre behavior. They were still good at what they did, offering clean cabins and plenty of options at the general store for visitors, but those same visitors weren't without concern regarding their weird and estranged hosts. 4 years later, in 1930, the population was a mere 7 inhabitants. Another 4 years later, and it dropped to 5, after the deaths of both Roy Stark and his elderly mother Anna. It's said Anna let her grip tighten over St. Elmo up until the day she died. Before long, Tony and Annabelle Stark were the last two folks to call the Saguache Range town their home. Not only that, but with the loss of their matriarch and oldest brother, the siblings let St. Elmo fall into ruins as their physical and psychological health declined even further. Travelers to St. Elmo would often comment on the dilapidated nature of the now ghost town, noticing its lack of electricity, plumbing, or sanitation, and leaving it moldy, mildewed, and overall, an unsightly mess. Neither Tony nor Annabelle attempted to keep up their personal appearance either. They wouldn't bathe regularly or even change their garments, let alone wash them. The once decadent home comfort hotel became littered with garbage, and its adjacent store was drenched in sickly smells of stale food and spoiled tobacco. In the 1940s, word spread like wildfire regarding the disarray of St. Elmo and its stain on the Colorado countryside. Both Tony and Annabelle attempted to quell these rumors, fighting back against populations that insisted they were operating the town while walking in their own filth. Now, not everyone who visited St. Elmo had bad things to say. Some regarded Annabelle as a very compassionate and considerate caretaker, and enjoyed spending time in the town away from towns. Still though, the gossip persisted. Annabelle was graced with the nickname Dirty Annie due to her consistently disheveled appearance, and those that did get a good look at her didn't stick around for long. Legend has it Annabelle Stark would stalk the streets of St. Elmo in her later years, equipped with nothing more than a rifle. It's said it was for her own protection, which begs the question, from what? There was nothing in a considerable radius to the town that posed a threat. The age of murderous outlaw gangs plaguing small outposts was by the wayside, as were the threats of small-time thieves and rustlers looking to stir up trouble in the melting pot of the frontier. If anything, Annabelle and her brother Tony were considered the actual threats to the weary travelers reluctantly stopping by St. Elmo. The rifle in the hands of a clearly disturbed individual did not sit well with the vacationers just looking for a tranquil place to rest, and the tourism dialed down into non-existence. On September 30th, 1952, the music died in St. Elmo, as the post office closed and the town officially reached ghost town status. Tony and Annabelle weren't given a choice and forced to check into a mental institution for their increasingly worrisome behavior. The stay only lasted a few weeks, however, when a family friend was able to influence the local law enforcement into chartering their very early release. Their caretaker promised authorities the living Stark children weren't a danger to anyone, including themselves, and deserved their freedom. The request was granted and turned out to be inconsequential. Tony passed away not long after release from the asylum, and Annabelle was admitted into a nursing home by 1958. She also met her demise soon after in 1960. Their St. Elmo estate was left to the anonymous caretaker who fought for their release. Despite the final member of that initial Stark family taking their last breath, the town of St. Elmo survived at the hands of their descendants and the aforementioned family friend. It was their dying wish for the legacy to carry on. Carry on it did. Most notably, the ghost of Annabelle remained in St. Elmo to keep watch over her wares, in the general store and beyond. The first report of paranormal activity came not long after Annabelle's death, when the grandchildren of the Stark caretaker were playing in the Home Comfort Hotel, and witnessed every single open door in the building slam shut. Not only that, but the children went on to complain of a sudden chill in the air, the temperature dropping from something pleasant to something frigid. It was frightening enough to dissuade the kids from ever entering the hotel again. Years later, more strange happenings occurred in the walls of the former hotel. When another Stark grandchild was of age, she took on a restoration project at the old Home Comfort Hotel. She recruited a few of her girlfriends, and the group started scrubbing the floors and walls, handling repairs, deep cleaning all of the rooms. It all came to a head though, when after finishing work for the day, the granddaughter and company packed up their tools and cleaning supplies in orderly fashion. It was normal practice after every single work shift, but on this occasion, the girls returned the following day only to find their things spread out in the middle of the main room. Taken aback, but not completely disturbed, the girls continued their handiwork for another few days. When the tools kept finding themselves on the floor, the workers took an extra step and brought a padlock to attach to the closet door where the supplies were held. Of course, this did little to deter whatever spirit or poltergeist was causing such chaos. The girls returned once again to find their tools thrown around the hotel and out of the locked storage. They never could pin down exactly who or what was pranking them, but they had a pretty good guess. Years later, an actual sighting of the supernatural was made by a lone skier who found themselves wandering St. Elmo and exploring its ghostly storefronts. The owner and operator of the general store was away on vacation that week, but the town wasn't unoccupied. The skier reported seeing a strikingly beautiful woman standing in front of a window on the second story of the hotel, wearing a long white dress. Her eyes were apparently transfixed on something further behind the skier, who turned around to see a snowmobile crew gliding down the snowy street. The skier approached the sledders and informed them that it was illegal to snowmobile in St. Elmo due to its historic status. The group abided by the warning and left, but before the skier made their exit as well, they turned back to the hotel to find the woman in the white nodding with approval. She then spun around and vanished into the darkness. Legend goes that this was a somewhat common ordeal in St. Elmo. It was said the ghost was that of Annabelle Stark, her spirit remaining in town to scare off trespassers and those up to no good. In 2002, much of the tourism still lingering in and around St. Elmo was killed off due to a fire that raged through town and burned down a few prominent buildings, such as the jailhouse, town hall, and part of the Stark family estate. A couple of months after the fact, The surviving structures were donated to the Buena Vista Heritage Museum, who wanted to preserve as much of historic St. Elmo as they could. As of today, most of these same buildings remain in town. While they are privately owned, the still standing general store sells merchandise to tourists and can be visited anytime between May and October. Interested travelers can trek to the school building, the residential cabins, and the church if they're so inclined. However, they should be warned, they are most likely not alone. Not due to new neighbors or a revitalized population, but due to the lingering spirits of the Stark family children. They were the first youth to call the Saguache mining town home, and the last to say goodbye. Although, depending on who you talk to, an actual goodbye never happened. Rather, they're still stuck inside the walls that surround St. Elmo, watching over the one place they were never allowed to leave, now fragments of the shattered frontier, left to forever haunt the Colorado timberline.